Let's go to Alicia Reed with more information on the suspect's long criminal record and how police were able to track him down. It's really incredible, Alicia.
Good evening, Jess. That's right. Within the last hour, Philadelphia's District Attorney Larry Krasner said he is heartbroken at the heinous crimes Keith Gibson is being charged with. He also says his office is dedicated to finding justice for the families that have been affected both in Philadelphia and here in Delaware. Locked up at the Howard Young Correctional Institute, Keith Gibson is undergoing a routine health evaluation while awaiting the outcome of legal proceedings. Wilmington police were able to arrest the murder suspect after a robbery at the 4th Street Rite Aid yesterday morning. We're told during the armed robbery, an employee managed to put a GPS tracker in the bag of cash, which helped police locate him. The 39-year-old was arrested about a block away and taken into custody.
I'm hoping that this is the final and, people can move forward.
The accused serial killer is suspected in a series of homicides. Currently charged with a number of felonies, Gibson is being held on $305,000 cash-only bail. The recent string of murders is being tied to Keith Gibson's name, starting with his mother's murder back in February. Christine Gibson, who dedicated her life to helping people in recovery, was at work in East Falls, Philadelphia when she was killed. Loved ones feared her only son had something to do with it.
We suspicion, but we had no proof.
Christine's body was discovered by her colleague and friend, Linda.
It was devastating to find her in that condition. If he needs some help, then get him some help. I just wish that they could have got him some help before.
Now, Gibson has an extensive rap sheet. He was on probation for a manslaughter charge he was convicted of back in 2010. For now, he will remain here while arraignment and extradition matters work their way through the courts. Reporting live from Wilmington, Delaware, Alicia Reed, CBS 3 Eyewitness News.
Alicia, thank you.
It was the winter of 2021 in Philadelphia. The air was heavy with cold, and the city was still shaking off the long shadow of the pandemic. People were trying to find normal again, opening shops, going back to work, trying to rebuild what was lost. But while families were searching for stability, one man was stepping into a violent spree that would terrify 2 states and leave a trail of death in its path. His name was Keith Gibson, a man who would become known by police and the press as the Beast. His story begins decades earlier in Philadelphia, where his childhood already set him apart. Born in 1982, Gibson was the only child of a mother who was just 15 years old when she gave birth to him. She tried to raise him with the help of her parents, but his father was absent from the start. Growing up without much structure, without a strong support system, Keith struggled. He dropped out of school, and from a young age, his life collided with the justice system. Arrests piled up. He was in and out of custody. Neighbors and relatives later described his childhood as one defined by instability, anger, and trouble that seemed to follow him everywhere. None of this excuses what would come, but it paints a picture of someone who spent his life walking the line between survival and destruction. By the late 2000s, Keith Gibson's crimes had escalated beyond theft and petty violence. In 2008, he killed a man named Stanley Savin Jones during a robbery in Delaware. Convicted of manslaughter and weapons charges, Gibson was sentenced to 20 years in prison. For a while, it seemed like the system had taken him off the streets for good, but the calendar kept moving. And in December 2020, after serving just over a decade, Gibson was paroled. The conditions were clear. He was supposed to stay in Delaware, check in with parole officers, and follow the rules. But Gibson had no interest in playing by the rules. Almost immediately, he began violating the terms of his release, traveling to Philadelphia when he wasn't supposed to, ignoring curfews, pushing the limits of his freedom. Delaware parole officers flagged the behavior and even recommended he be sent back to finish his sentence. But instead of locking him down, the court gave him only 31 days in custody for the violations. In April 2021, Keith Gibson walked out of prison again, still under supervision, but free enough to act. What followed was a nightmare. On January 28, 2021, just weeks after leaving prison, Gibson walked into a small store in Philadelphia's Germantown neighborhood. It was called Al Medina Traders. Inside were two customers, 50-year-old Eric Flores and 42-year-old Roy Caban. Gibson shot them both, execution style. Flores once in the head, Caban twice in the face. Their bodies were discovered by a passerby. Just 11 days later, on February 8th, the violence hit even closer to home. Gibson confronted his own mother, Christine Gibson, at her workplace in East Falls. She was just 54 years old. He shot her in the head, killing her instantly. It was shocking, brutal, and it revealed something chilling about him. If he could kill his own mother without hesitation, what else was he capable of? Authorities had reason to intervene at this point. They had seen him violate parole. They had seen the signs, but instead of being stopped, Gibson kept moving, slipping between the cracks of two states, and his violence escalated. On May 15th, 2021, in Ellesmere, Delaware, Gibson entered a Metro by T-Mobile store. The victim was 28-year-old Leslie Liseth Ruiz Basilio. He forced her into the back of the store and shot her in the head, then stole her car and drove away. That car was later found in Philadelphia, another breadcrumb in the trail he was leaving behind. Just 3 weeks later, on June 5th, 2021, the city of Philadelphia woke up to another tragedy. It was early in the morning at a Dunkin' in the Fair Hill neighborhood. 40-year-old store manager Christine Lugo was opening the shop, preparing for another day of work. Gibson appeared, forced her inside at gunpoint, robbed around $300 from the register, and then shot her in the head. She never made it home. The very next day, June 6th, Gibson struck again, this time in Wilmington, Delaware. He robbed and shot a man named Ronald Wright, 42 years old, killing him during the encounter. That same day, he walked into another store, this time targeting a clerk named Bilal Al-Mansouri. Gibson shot him in the head during the robbery, but Al-Mansouri survived by pretending to be dead. He later became a key witness against Gibson. By this point, Gibson had been tied to multiple murders across 2 states in the span of just a few months. He was armed, he wore body armor, and he carried not just a gun, but also a knife. Police were scrambling. Communities were terrified. But Gibson wasn't finished yet. On June 8th, 2021, just days after his last killing, he walked into a Rite Aid in Wilmington and tried to rob it. What he didn't know was that the clerk had slipped a GPS tracker into the bag of stolen cash. Police followed the signal, closing in quickly. When they arrested him, Gibson was armed with a loaded revolver, wearing body armor, and carrying stolen items linked to several of the crimes. Ballistic testing would later prove that the revolver was the same gun used in multiple murders. From there, the courts took over. Delaware prosecutors moved first, focusing on the killings of Ruiz Basilio and Ronald Wright, the attempted murder of Bilal al-Mansouri, and a string of robberies and assaults. The evidence against him was overwhelming: surveillance footage, ballistics, eyewitness testimony, stolen property. In November 2023, a Delaware jury found Keith Gibson guilty of 2 counts of murder, attempted murder, robbery, and firearms offenses. 4 months later, in March 2024, Judge Ferris Wharton handed down a sentence that left no doubt Gibson would never walk free again. 7 life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus nearly 300 years stacked on top for the other crimes. It was one of the harshest sentences in Delaware history, but that was only part of the story. Across the state line, in Philadelphia, Gibson still faces trials for the killings of Christine Lugo, his mother, Christine Gibson, Eric Flores, and Roy Caban. If convicted there, more life sentences will almost certainly be added to his name. In court hearings in Philadelphia, Gibson has already shown his contempt. In September 2024, during a preliminary hearing, he interrupted testimony again and again, shouting until the judge had him removed from the courtroom. His behavior in custody has been described as combative and unrepentant, consistent with the man investigators described as cold-blooded and remorseless. For the families of his victims, the court process has been agonizing. They have had to relive the violence, hear the details, sit across from the man who stole their loved ones. Each name is more than just a case file. Eric Flores, a father and friend. Roy Caban, a man with a family who loved him. Christine Gibson, a mother and community worker. Leslie Ruiz Basilio, a young woman working in retail. Christine Lugo, a Dunkin' manager known for her kindness. Ronald Wright, a 42-year-old robbed of his future. Their stories matter, and their losses ripple outward, hitting children, parents, siblings, friends, and co-workers. Looking back, the failures are impossible to ignore. Delaware parole officers had asked that Gibson be returned to prison after his violations. They saw the risk. They raised the red flag. But the court gave him 31 days, and then he walked free. Within weeks, people were dead. It is easy in hindsight to say the system failed. But for those who lost family members, that failure feels unbearable. It raises questions that still hang heavy today. How closely are parolees monitored? How much weight should a judge give to warnings from parole officers? How do different states coordinate when someone under supervision crosses borders? Keith Gibson's crimes left a scar, not just on the families who lost loved ones, but on the wider communities of Philadelphia and Wilmington. For store owners, workers opening early, clerks handling cash, there was a wave of fear. People began asking themselves, could it happen again? Could someone walk in armed and armored and end it all in an instant? The brutality of the crimes made them stand out. Cold executions, often after robbery. Victims shot in the head at close range. They were not random acts of rage. They were deliberate, calculated, and heartless. Then today, Keith Gibson sits behind bars in Delaware, serving 7 life sentences plus hundreds of years. His name is locked into the history of American crime, a reminder of what can happen when violence is allowed to spiral unchecked. He is awaiting trial in Pennsylvania, But no matter the outcome there, his fate is sealed. He will die in prison. But while his story may end in a cell, the stories of his victims ended in workplaces, in stores, in neighborhoods, in moments of ordinary life that were brutally cut short. And so, the case of Keith Gibson is not just about one man's descent into violence. It is about the holes in the system that allowed him out when he should not have been free. It is about the communities left to mourn. It is about the families forced to rebuild with empty seats at their tables. It is about questions we cannot ignore. How do we balance second chances against public safety, and at what cost? In the end, Gibson chose violence at every turn, and the world lost lives that cannot be replaced. That is the story that matters most. The victims, their families, and the reminder that behind every headline and every courtroom sentence are people who deserved so much more than to be remembered only as names in a list of the dead.